Welcome to Soldering with Ellen. I'm going to be going through some soldering tips and practices. I've never done an online tutorial type of thing for this. I usually do it in person. And originally there was going to be a soldering workshop at Dust Bunny where I taught people how to make contact microphones. But because of everything that's going on right now, obviously that's not possible, so I'm doing this little tutorial. If you have questions, just kind of like type them out or ask them along the way. I'll be looking every now and again at my phone. Yay, everybody. So another thing about these these workshops that I run is I do not try to pretend that I have all of the soldering knowledge. I have some soldering knowledge, and there's a lot of different types of soldering. There's through-hole soldering, which you do with circuit boards and component parts. There's soldering that you might do to fix lighting, where you're using wires and getting wires together. There's soldering that you might do in cars. For repairing different electronics and parts. There's also surface mount soldering, where you put little tiny component parts on a tiny circuit board and you bake it in an oven. So you're placing the parts, the electronic parts, with tweezers. Today we're going to be doing something, or I'm going to be showing you a pretty simple soldering project, which is to build a contact microphone. And that uses some various parts that I'm going to go through and some various materials. But first I'm going to talk about safety. Hi. So soldering is, it's not that risky, but there are certain things you want to make sure you're taking care of and that are kind of in place when you solder. You want to make sure you have ventilation, because when you're soldering, even with the safer solder, which is lead-free solder, there's a rosin core. There's flux that kind of comes off. That's the smoke that you see coming off of when you're soldering. That's not lead, that's flux with a rosin core, and that's actually bad for you as well. So you want to have either a fan going or you want ventilation. We have the skylights open today, so that's helpful. Also, obviously, soldering irons are very hot. You want to grip the plastic part. You don't ever want to touch any of this metal. It's really hot. It will burn you. It sucks. I've definitely been burnt by it. It won't be the end of the world, but it'll hurt. So you want to be careful of that. If you're being extra careful, you might want to wear goggles or glasses to kind of in case any hot solder comes flying at you. That's never happened to me before, but that's something to keep in mind. You also want a wet sponge at your disposal, and that helps for kind of getting the solder off of the iron and helping to keep the iron clean. If you're really fancy, you'll have this kind of mesh copper wire sponge that's really cool and helps a lot. I don't have one of those. Kind of actually some limited materials right now. The nice soldering iron that we thought we had kind of walked off. So I'm using this one, which actually Emil wonderfully kind of cleaned up a little bit. So let's get into the parts and okay, no questions thus far. So we have the soldering iron. Best is if you can get a soldering iron that you can actually change the temperature for. For this particular project, we want it to be pretty hot. And you can get those online or even at Home Depot or otherwise. We have the solder, and we're using lead-free solder today. Another safety thing, especially if you're using solder with lead, you have to clean your hands afterwards, and don't eat while soldering, don't drink while soldering, although the first time I ever soldered, I drank a lot of beer. Don't do things near your mouth because if you're using lead-free solder, that's just like really risky. And as soon as you're done soldering, you want to wash your hands. Even with this, it's just kind of good to keep up that practice. And now that we're all really good at washing our hands, it's something that shouldn't be too hard to do. So we have the soldering irons, we got our sponge, we got lead-free solder. This is flux. We had to break it to get in because it wasn't opening up. But this basically really helps the solder to flow into the circuit. So if you're having a hard time where sometimes the solder will want to stick, it really wants to stay on the iron. So what you actually try to do is heat up the joint, and you're trying not to touch the solder straight to the iron because it'll kind of just stick on there and then it won't flow into the joint. But something that really helps is if you get some flux, and flux helps the solder to flow into the circuit or into the joint that you're trying to make, which will be a little bit difficult later, as you'll see. So those are some of the materials. Some other materials and tools are wire strippers and wire cutters. This will be really helpful for this project because we're going to be using this wire. And you can use speaker cable wire if there's a mom and pop electronics store, they'll have wire like this that you can buy in really big lengths. You can also get stuff online, and you can do this if you want to do single strand wire and kind of cobble together a wire. I've done that before, but today I'm going to be using this kind of nicer wire, which actually has 3 strands in it. You can see here. I'm going to be twisting together these strands because, as you will see later, the piezo element just has the 2 wires coming off of it. One is ground and one is signal, one is positive. We'll go over that in a bit. And I also have some pliers in case we need those. We have a lighter for later on when we use some shrink wrap. Have this handy utility knife, which may or may not use, but just in case. Also have some electrical tape that can be helpful for taping up your joints, your exposed wires. But I'm actually going to be using something else, which is shrink wrap. That will be used in conjunction with this lighter to shrink it over the kind of open joint and wires. There's also this soldering wick. I'm not going to use this today, I don't think, but this helps to desolder. So if you have a joint or you made a joint and you're like, crap, I didn't mean to make that, you can use this solder wick to get that solder off and out of there. Okay. Let's see if any questions. Just checking in. Does anybody have questions? I see no questions. Pop them in there if you have them though. And so now I told you about the wire. I'm going to kind of get into the other parts that we're going to be working with today. This is a TS jack. You can also, so this is the male version of it, and this is the female version of it. Those binaries, I don't know. Let's put upon binaries aside. This you can use either of these to make this contact microphone. I'm going to be using this one today. This one's really great because you can then put another cable or a speaker cable into it, and then it can become as long as you want it to. And it's I would recommend using one of these, but this one's kind of broken and I don't have any others on hand, so we're gonna use this. And TS means that it's a tip sleeve. So the tip has the, which goes here, goes to here. The tip will have this signal running through it, so that's the positive, and then the sleeve is the grounded part, and this is the sleeve component. So one thing that we need to really keep in mind is kind of the positive versus the ground, the signal versus the ground part here, and make sure that it connects to the piezo element, which also has a ground versus a signal part. And does anybody have any guesses as to which part is the signal and which part is the ground on the piezo element? I'm going to see if anybody responds. I know there's a lag here, so I'm just going to wait. My phone that I'm using is very slow. Wow. Maybe nobody's gonna answer. Okay, thanks. Somebody got in there. Thanks, Sean Ongley, for just joining in and getting at that answer there. It's the red. So the red is the signal, and then the black is the ground. So you'll notice that the signal goes to like the center part of the piezo element. This is like ceramic. And it has this kind of like crystalline structure that does this wild thing in piezo elements with this like compression. There's this, the way it makes sound, or kind of, the way that sound is made with piezo elements is really interesting. I'm not going to get into the intricacies here. If you want to look it up, I highly suggest it. And then this is the ground, is this outer part. And you can kind of think about it like this outer is like the sleeve. So this outer part goes to the sleeve, and this inner part goes to the tip of the of this jack. So you just want to be mindful of that. Some interesting things about these piezo elements: you can get them out of old toys. They will often be like, they kind of have this buzzer mentality. You can actually get them as a buzzer in Home Depot. They're like the thing that makes doorbells go. So they will create a buzzing sound, but then you can also use them as a microphone to pick up vibrations and to kind of amplify sounds. But they won't amplify your voice. Like if you try to speak into like a microphone, it won't work, but it will like pick up on like these vibrations. Like if you feel your neck and the vibrations, you can feel those vibrations. That is what a piezo element, a contact microphone, will pick up on, and that's why it's called contact microphone. It needs to be, just one moment. It needs to be making contact. Did I lose the contact microphone or the piezo element? Oh, here it is. It's like we're right next to it. Okay. All right, so that's this little guy. And like I said, you can find them actually in like, those cards that like, those holiday cards that you open them up and a song plays. There's a piezo element in there making that song, like making that sound, like hooked up to a circuit. So you can like take those apart and find these piezo elements. I have this like, somebody gave me this like big bag of aqua alarms, like water checks, and within these there's like there's a piezo element in here that I thought maybe I would tear apart, but I might get into that later if there's time. So if you pull this apart, there's a piezo element hooked up to a bunch of like other component parts like resistors and other things, and it was used for this like water alarm. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm just gonna check again, make sure there's no questions. Yes, Acker, the ground is the non-red one. So the ground is in this scenario, in this context, the ground is the black one, but that can change. So you always got to check, and you can check that if you want with a multimeter, which I'm not going to do that today. I'm not getting into that. Okay, so I have this wire, this nice long cable. I'm gonna decide how long I want it to be. I'm just gonna, I could just like make it super long, but in the interest of some kind of ease, I'm gonna make it not super long. So I'm gonna cut it. Hey, cool. And then you need to strip the wires using this wire stripper, and it has different different holes for different gauges of wire. And if you're really on top of it, you can get a particular gauge of wire online or otherwise, or like at your mom and pop electrical store that may or may not exist anymore. And then you'll know which hole to use according to the numbers here. So I'm going to try out the 10. Let's see what happens. And actually, I'm not going to do it so much, just a little bit. Whoops. So like a half an inch there, I'd say, is like what I did. And then within the bigger casing are these smaller casings, and you can see again the red and the black, right? So I want to keep this black as the ground, and then this red and yellow I'm going to combine to be this signal. And that has to do with the fact that there's, with this piezo element, it's mono. It's a mono situation. That's also why I'm using the TS. So we just have like a mono thing going on. You can use like a TRS and then tip ring sleeve, which would then have like two little, so there's like this one little tab coming down from the tip, with a tip ring sleeve, which has like the two lines here. You would have two of those tabs coming down, and those signify kind of like the right and the left signal, but we're not dealing with that. You don't have a right and left signal coming from this little piezo guy. He's just got the mono going on. So then we also need to strip these wires. And stripping wires is like, it is a skill in and of itself, let me tell you. It can take a while to figure out. I know people who do a lot of electrical stuff that use their teeth, especially if there's like little tiny wires, like these actually might not even work well. So I might have to like just very gently do that. So this, I just kind of gauged the pressure that I wanted to strip that with, and you have the wires. And that's hard, that can be hard. So you can also get, there's other types of wire strippers that kind of like have a spring on them and that are smaller and a little bit easier to deal with these smaller wires. So do that again. And I'm just doing really light pressure with this. There we go. Cool. So I'm going to twist these two wires together. Let's see. Any questions? Any questions? Feel free to pop in any questions. So the yellow and the red go together. The black stays on its own. And I'm going to start by doing this part of the soldering. And before I solder and get these parts in here, I want to make sure I don't forget about this sleeve. I've done this before where I solder and then I'm like, oh no, I forgot. Here's this over here. It's supposed to, and I can't get it on anymore. That's also if I would have already soldered, like say I've done the whole thing and then I'm like, oh, it's over there. If you do it now, there is still the option, like you could like slip it over. But I'm gonna do it beforehand just to be like extra safe. Before I get ahead of myself. All right, here we go. Just get this through. And now it'll be ready to screw back on. after I'm done soldering. Another fun thing to have is a third arm, which is are these little like stands that have little clips on them, like alligator clips. Don't have one of those, sorry. So you see these little holes. You can put the wire through those holes. And my hands are a little shaky now because in front of the camera. Okay, hopefully. Okay, so that one went through there. And I'm gonna fold over that. And this is, again, this is the ground. This is the ground that goes to the sleeve. And you can even see the sleeve, it like connects to the sleeve. You can see it's like one kind of component. And then the ring is coming down through the middle. So again, think about that. At least in this particular project, this signal, the positive is coming through the middle. Same here, middle. The sleeve is on the outside. The ring on the outside here too. And this piezo is kind of beat up. Oh no. All right. Well, before and this can be a delicate process. It takes time. Don't rush it. It can be really frustrating. Soldering can be very frustrating. It takes patience and it takes kind of like time to learn it. Or practice. Kind of similar to sewing maybe in some ways. All right. So because I don't have a third hand, I'm just gonna like use some tape. I'm just gonna tape my component down so it just stays there. And I've known people to also they actually like to literally use a third hand, like they like to have somebody help solder them or help them to solder. So they prefer their third hand to actually be a physical other hand. So you can have somebody help you to solder too, where like they're holding the components and you're doing the soldering. And it's kind of like, that can be kind of fun for students as well, to kind of like work on a project together. Okay, so now we got that little baby set up. Another thing that you want to do before you start off with the soldering is to do something called tinning the tip, which means putting a little bit of, you're going to let a little bit of solder get on there. See that smoke? That's the flux. That's actually bad for you. So just because it's lead-free solder doesn't mean it's completely safe. And then you use the sponge to get off, and there's like a little ball of solder that you can see that came off. And now you can see the tip is kind of like a little bit silver. So that's helpful. I'm not going to use flux for these joints. I'll use it on the other end though, so you can kind of see how to use that. All right, so then you just let the soldering iron heat up the joint. And ideally, you wouldn't touch the solder to the soldering iron. You would touch it to the joint that's getting hot. And the joint being the connection of this sleeve and the wire. I'm kind of cheating though. It's kind of like it's still it's touching the iron. I'm trying not to do that, but it's happening. All right, and then you take away the soldering iron. So I'm going to do it a little bit more. You can see the solder kind of flow into that moment, into that joint where the two pieces of metal are coming together. And then I take away the solder and then the soldering iron. And we have our joint. So you can see it kind of like flash and change colors a little bit in so that's like a pretty good joint there. That's not going anywhere. Next, I want to wrangle these wires. And I'm gonna let this come up again. I'm gonna wrangle these wires. Oh my God. If I can. You get to see how incredibly dry my hands are from like so much hand washing. Too much hand washing. And let's see if there's any. Okay, we're good on time. There we go. Okay. So I put it through the hole. Another thing in this project is you want to have the wire coming through this middle part. And you'll see in a moment why you want that. You get to like crimp these down, and it's just like, it's much cleaner. I've had students before where they accidentally kind of like go from the other side, or the cable's over here, and then they are later like, oh no. So you want to have the cable coming up through the middle. You want everything to kind of be neat and clean and put together in that way. All right. And just a note on lead-free solder, it's a bit more difficult to solder with. And that's probably even why solder with lead, because you might be like, why is there even solder with lead anymore? Like, that's unsafe, that's ridiculous. The reasoning is because it's actually much easier to solder with lead-free solder. As messed up as lead is and as bad as it is for you, those joints last for longer, for like a longer period of time. But I still suggest using lead-free solder and just having a really good soldering iron that gets hot enough. But also, if you, again, washing your hands. Definitely make sure to wash your hands. Okay, so here we go again. Gonna be heating up the joint. So heating up this moment where both pieces of wire come together, and then I'm putting the solder in there. Trying really hard not to touch the solder to the soldering iron, because what you're trying to do is actually heat up the joint enough, so heat up those two pieces of metal that they will melt the solder. Because again, it's really easy to have the solder just stick to the soldering iron, and it's really frustrating. It's taking its time. It's the waiting game, the soldering waiting game. And again, I'm kind of cheating, getting that soldering iron. You also will sometimes find that your iron might have certain parts of it that are hotter than others. Like there will be this one part of the soldering iron that gets really hot and actually will help the solder to flow. And probably at that point you should get a new soldering tip. Which is, okay, yeah, there we go. So again, we got our solder point in there now. And you can see I made a little bit of a mistake there where I took, before I took the solder away, I took the soldering iron away, and then this was like stuck there. It was like, oh no, like it also kind of melded to that. So that's like one thing in the order of operations. You want to first take away the solder and then the soldering iron. Yeah. So there we go. We got this little guy. Oh, and then we're gonna do this really fun part where you crimp it. Okay, so, and I'll use this, maybe. Well, first I'll use my hands. So you get to crimp this down. Oh, and it's so satisfying. It's great. Look at that. And then you can kind of like squeeze it a little bit more, maybe. There we go. Oh, it's beautiful. So satisfying. Isn't that great? You get to crimp it down. Cool. All right, so that part is done, and now you can do this beautiful moment where you put that back together. Hell yeah. And even as messy as your soldering might be, maybe it looks like a total mess chaos under there, nobody will know. As long as you don't have, this is another important thing. As long as you make sure that these stay separate, you do not want the ground and the signal to touch at all. The two should never meet. So these wires, you want to make sure that these wires never get in there. You could like get really particular about it, and you could maybe add some like hot glue. I do have a hot glue gun. I'm not going to do it, but you could like add some hot glue in there to like cover up, see these like exposed wires, to be like really good about it in terms of the signal. But I'm not going to do that. Maybe if you have time later, I'll like work on that part, because it's removable. You can move it back and forth. Okay, so now to the maybe a little bit trickier part of dealing with the wires and the piezo element. These are very delicate. You can see them, very tiny. One lucky thing though is this piezo element came with wires already attached. It's pretty hard to solder to this center part, the ceramic. So it's hard to get solder to stick to that. I've done it before. It can work, but it's just like, it's very frustrating, or it can be very frustrating. So having, buying a piezo element or getting an element that already has these wires out is helpful. Radio Shack used to sell lots of buzzers that you could crack. You could get these out of the buzzers. RIP Radio Shack. So, all right, I'm gonna do some more wire stripping, which you will find in whatever, soldering projects happens a lot. Oof, and this one is gonna be really hard because it's super tiny. So I really wanna like just squeeze it. All right, I might bust out. Oh yeah, Emil is making the signal for the lighter. Oh, which I think my lighter dropped. One thing you can do is you can burn off the plastic, which is obviously not ideal because fumes. But yet again, if you're soldering, you will have a fan around, or you'll have some good ventilation, a window open. Not everybody does. You can, take risks if you want. I have actually never done this before, so I'm also trying something new. All right, let's see. Here we go. All right, Emil, do I just like burn it the whole way, and then I scrub
pull it off real quick? Yeah.
All right, and then I'm gonna pull it off. Not so quick. There we go. Beautiful. Look at that. Thanks, Emil. Okay, so, and also you see like, dang, those wires that's delicate. There's not that much in there. So, all right. There we go. And then, okay, that didn't work. I'll burn it a little bit more. There we go. There's some wires in there. I'm gonna do a little bit more. And these are the types of wires that my one friend would use her teeth with, and just like, I could also try that. I'm not gonna. But you gotta be careful about that. You can also fuck up your teeth. There we go. So that worked pretty well. Teamwork for sure. And that's the great thing. Like, I actually love soldering with other people and having workshops, because I learn so much from other people who are sometimes even soldering for the first time, or maybe didn't even think they had any soldering knowledge, but they're like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm just remembering, like, I totally helped my dad in his like repair workshop, and like he always wanted me to solder because I had like smaller hands, or I don't know, there's really interesting stories that come up when you solder, and kind of the materiality of it. It also feels like magic. It's kind of magical that you're just melding these wires together, melding these pieces of metal together with other other metal? I don't know. Okay, so I'm then gonna do these guys again. I'm gonna use this method though for these because I find it satisfying. Oh my gosh. There we go. And I took off some of the wire. You can kind of see this one's a little bit less. I accidentally took off some of the wire as I was doing this squeeze technique. But that's okay. Oh. Hit again. That's okay because, you know, these two wires will come together. It's okay. It's fine. And so that's the risk that you take with that squeeze technique that I was doing, where I wasn't using one of the holes because these holes are too big for this gauge, is that you might take some of the wires that you want with you. All right, so we got those linked up again, and oh yeah, okay. So I promised I would use flux this time, and I'm gonna dip the wire into some flux to get it good and on there. I'll also dip these ends into flux. Again, teamwork, because this the top of this was an opening and then Emil smashed it open. All right. And I'm gonna wrap these fluxy wires together. And I'm gonna do that one first before I wrap the other one together. So when you're doing this and wrapping the wires together that way, it's good to have it this way. You can also like twist them up in this other way, but I think this is considered, oh wait, I almost did a thing. I almost did the thing. Okay, before we want to solder, want the shrink wrap on there. And I'm gonna cut it. Okay, so I'm cutting a piece off. If I can actually, there we go. And I want to slip this over, kind of similar with this cover. You want this shrink wrap. This is going to be helpful later. I mean, if you forget it, you can use some electrical tape, but it's nice to have the little like shrinky tube, not shrink wrap, shrink tube. Okay, so again, back to wrapping wires that have flux on them. Another reason to wash your hands later. All right, and so yet again, I'm gonna heat this up. You can see the fluxes kind of coming off. Again, this lead-free solder takes a minute. Takes a long minute. Another thing you can also do is dip the solder in some flux and see if that helps. Problem solving. A lot of soldering is problem solving and kind of like working with what you got in the moment. Some people don't have flux and they just have to wait. Oh, there we go. Okay, and now it's flowing. There we go. But it took a moment. But then there's like this magical, mystical moment where it just like, poof, it just goes and then you're good. So you can see there's a little bit of silver there. I am actually going to use some electrical tape. I know I said I wasn't going to keep these two wires, these two guys, not crossing. Sorry for my hand. So, electrical tape. And I'm just gonna cut it this way. And one thing you might have noticed also is that I was kind of putting the wire in between the solder and the soldering iron. There we go. So now those guys are together and more secure. Cool. And again, we got the positive, we got the signal, positive to positive, and now we connect the ground to the ground. So let's do some more flux magic. I used to never use this and thought it was like lame. I was like, ugh. People who use flux. But now I'm like a big proponent. I'm like, actually, flux rules. It's great. Helps out a lot. Oop. Okay, I put a lot of flux in there. Put some on there. Here we go. You need again, so I'm holding the soldering iron below and then the solder on top. And whoa, that was quick actually. Look at that. I was like kind of right away, instantaneous almost. So here you go. Another thing you can do, which I'm not doing this time, but these wires, something you can do is before you connect them, you can get solder onto them. So you can like add a bit and be like, okay, I'm gonna actually like have this like pre-solder moment. So you solder it up and then you connect them and it'll be easier. There will already be like solder on your guys, and that's another good way to do it actually. I've actually done a workshop with somebody talked with somebody who they learned how to solder by with their mom making stained glass. Anybody else learn soldering through other arts and crafts like stained glass making? Are there kind of like repair things? I'll look at your answers later. Okay. So here we go. Gonna wrap this little guy up too. This little sausage. Wrapping around. All right, cool. You want to keep them from crossing. So that's cool. And we can bring this up and then get ready to do another like little burny thing. I'm burning it. We also probably could have, I might like wrap this up a bit to like help out with these wires that look a little sad and kind of weak. But for now, all right. And so this, this shrink cable stuff is great. I'm probably putting the flame too close to it, to be honest. But yeah, it just shrinks with heat. There you go. Ta-da. Yay. All right. So we have like a little bit of time. I'm wondering if anybody has like questions or thoughts, or maybe you have like tips. If you have other tips or other ways that you solder or that have been helpful for you for soldering, feel free to put it in there in like the little comment zone. Or if you've had troubles with soldering, put it out there. And all of these things, all of these like parts are pretty easy to get. Again, either at like your local electronics store or online. There's actually this really cool electronics store where I lived in Troy in upstate New York for a minute that was there since the 1920s. And there was this little bat that lived there amongst all the electronics. All right, so there we go. And I'm also gonna so hot glue when dealing with electronics like this is helpful. I don't know if this is plugged in though. I think it's plugged in. It's plugged in. So it helps to kind of ooh. This thing is maybe messed up. This glue gun stick looks like it got a little bit. Oh, there we go. So kind of adding some hot glue to these moments helps it to be a little bit stronger. You can also put these, some people put the piezo element in a bottle cap, which I don't think we have any around here, but that's another way to kind of encase it and keep it a little safe. You can probably find tutorials for that. All right, so that's good for now. This is a little bit broken. And yeah, now we can test it. Although I'm gonna check and see if there's any questions. Okay, no questions that I can see thus far. Oh wait, maybe there was a question. No. All right, well, I lost the comments, so are there any questions, man? No questions, okay. So now I'm gonna try this out. And here's the moment where we get to find out did I actually do it? Is it gonna work? It works. Okay, let's see. Oh, kind of works. Hello, hello, hello. There's maybe something wrong with it though. Hello? It's not picking up on my voice too well, but it's picking up on something. Let's see if this works. Oh, that's not Well, it works. But it's, I'll probably go back in and, since there's clearly some buzzing and interference, I'll probably go back in and kind of clean up the wires that I pointed out that were in the casing. But yeah, that's it. That's how you make a contact microphone. And that's how you solder. Alright, that's at least, that's how I solder and how I've been kind of practicing soldering. Hopefully when all this is over, we can have an actual, hands-on Skillshare soldering jam session where we make contact microphones. If you want to bring in broken stuff, I had a soldering night with my friend where we fixed some broken lights of hers. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with soldering. Yeah. And there's a lot of we could do some through-hole soldering and make some little parts at certain points. Oh, there's actually you can also do this thing. And if you saw Emil's little sound device, kind of the thing that helps do all the IG streaming and the sound stuff, he kind of cobbled together this amazing wire with a microphone cable that leads into the phone. But it's really cool how it's done, where there's no board for it, and it's just soldering components to other components. You can kind of do that. There's through boards that you can buy offline, or you can make your own. And this is actually a circuit I made a long time ago, and it's not the best soldering, but it's supposed to be a little micro radio, very micro transmitter radio, or transmitter for radio. And you can just kind of use a copper plate and put your parts in different places according to the schematic. So there's some different ways that you can build things with soldering and circuitry. Yay. Anyway, thanks all for tuning in. Hope to see you IRL at some point in this life.